I got an emergency disaster warning at school, Part 1, written by HHeyPeter. People always tell me that I shouldn't be excited about heading to summer school, but any reason for me to get out of the house was one that I took with great enthusiasm. I'm an extrovert by nature, and being at home just makes me feel claustrophobic. Plus, trigonometry had plummeted my average for math class straight into the dirt. So, some extra lessons in the hot summer month of July was my golden ticket to achieving an average that didn't make my parents want to berate me over and over. I was optimistic about the venture back to school. It was only a couple of weeks of classes, meaning that I can get my marks up and still enjoy August summer warmth with enough time for me to properly recharge my batteries for another 10 months of school. But my joy spoiled and turned into disappointment when I woke up early to the sound of a raging thunderstorm outside. I hated weather like this. Why did it need to literally rain on my parade? I admit, the weather plays a more significant role in affecting my mood, so I went through my morning routine with a persistently glum feeling. It's hard to say why weather plays with my mood so aggressively. I'm prone to mood swings much more than the average guy, but none of the psychiatrists I've spoken to have experienced anything to the degree that I've described. Agreeable and smiling in the sunlight, ambivalence in the occasional windy day, and melancholy in the dull, wet, miserable rain. I thought that it was a mild case of seasonal depression, but I didn't fit any of the criteria for any medical professional to properly diagnose me with it. So it rests in that gray zone of undiagnosed, which has loomed over my waking life. Still, I try to do my best to ignore it and set a positive example for everyone around me. And I won't let the weather ruin that. It was a lonely drive to school. The country back roads I took were slick with rainwater and coated in the thick, turbulent mist that covered the moist farmlands that faced each side of the narrow road that I drove on. My windshield wipers creaked and groaned as they slid across the glass, spreading the murky rain droplets so thinly that I could just barely see the road ahead of me. The radio had long since ceased functioning in my beat-up Honda Civic, so the sound of the rain was my only audible stimulant, which paired well with the sound of my tires against the slippery road. The waterproof jacket that I wore protected my torso from the rain well enough, but my legs and shoes were all slick with rainwater. And I had neglected to put my hood up when I ran to my car, so my hair was soaked. I had spent so much time washing, curling, and drying my hair only for the rain to dampen it, so go figure. I took to taking rhythmic inhales and exhales to try and stabilize my mood. I wasn't loving the idea of being mopey and uncooperative during class. I came here to improve my marks, not waste the instructor's time with my attitude. After a few hearty exhales, I dubbed the rainstorm as an insignificant negative smear on an otherwise good day. And there was plenty of time in the day for me to be happy. Shortly after I recollected myself, I arrived at school. South Elmont Secondary School was what one could dub a desperation area school, where several small country towns located too far from any type of school all decide to erect a school close to a middle point in all the towns, in order to gather all the available youth and give them a proper education. While this fact aided South Elmont into becoming the multicultural melting pot that it so proudly advertises, it also shares the burden of trying to contain multiple conflicting cultures in one cramped location. Oftentimes, groups of the rural country-loving kids would get into fights with the bookish suburban kids who skipped Catholic school to come here. Myself, I never really found a group to call my own. I kept to myself and spent my lunches reading in the library. I used my backpack to shield my head from the rain as I leapt out of my car and raced to the front door from the parking lot, taking note of how empty it was. I didn't expect many cars to be here during the summertime, but it was all but abandoned, save for a handful of cars parked in the small square reserved for teachers. Entering the building, the warm, pungent smell of mud and sweat hit me in the face like a punch, causing me to scrunch my nose in retreat. Did someone leave their muddy boots on a radiator in here? It sure smells like it. I covered my nose with my hand and walked towards the main office, the heat in the school already making my coat sweaty and uncomfortable. I marveled at the vast emptiness of the school around me. Not a soul in sight. Not a student, not a teacher, or even a janitor. It was entirely vacant. Obviously, I didn't come with the expectation that the school would be packed, but I at least expected someone. Swiftly removing my coat, I folded it under my arm and glanced around both sides of the hallway beside the main office. Both were empty. Where is everyone? I muttered to myself, pulling out my phone from my pants pocket to reassure myself that I came here on the correct date. July 4th, 7:20 a.m. I was here on time, early even. Why are none of the staff here? Was I too early? The sound of groaning from a creaking door snapped me out of my confusion. Hello there. Are you here for a summer education course? A woman's voice asked. I turned around and saw the school receptionist, Mrs. Mullaney, opening the door from inside the office. I let out a sigh of relief. Yes, I am. Could you please point me to where Mr. Salmon's trigonometry class is? I asked her. Could I ask your name? I'd like a head start on doing school-wide attendance, she replied, holding a pen and notepad that she had pulled out of her back pocket. Jamie Spears, I answered, feeling a small sense of pride that I was the first one to show up. She scribbled my name down on the pad and told me that Mr. Salmon's class was located in room 209, which was down the hall towards the west back exit. I thanked her and waved her a goodbye and made my way down the hall, ready to show up and impress the teacher with an excellent first impression. Maybe I came a little too early, but I'm not complaining. I found the classroom door and gave it a gentle knock, a bright smile on my face. Mr. Salmon opened the door quickly. He was a balding, middle-aged man dressed in a pink button-down and khakis that looked clean and kempt, as if they were brand new. Nice to see you here, Jamie. You're quite early, he said cheerfully. I always tried diligently to become a teacher's pet, and my efforts were handsomely rewarded with Mr. Salmon's favoritism. Of course I got here early. I couldn't wait for the lesson, I said. I am assuredly not excited about trigonometry, but I don't mind bending the truth in order to keep the status quo of our student-teacher relationship. He opened the door fully and stood back, allowing me to enter the classroom. It definitely had the appearance of a classroom that wasn't normally in use. Thick dust still coated a few select desks. The light fixtures were barely able to muster the energy to light up the room in full, and the sound of the ventilation reigned supreme over the distant cracks of thunder. The moth-eaten blinds failed to fully cover their respective dirty windows, which gave me a clear view of the storm outside. It was still as gray and miserable as it was when I left my house. The desks were organized in rows of 4 by 4, lengthwise and widthwise, with maybe half of them having chairs. In the closest row to the back wall, someone I didn't recognize was sitting in the middle row. A dark-skinned boy with a thick mustache wearing a t-shirt with the logo of the Toronto Raptors on it. slouched over his desk, looking to be in a deep sleep. Class doesn't start until 8 a.m., and I thought I got here early. How long has this guy been here? "Nahil, are you awake?" Mr. Salmon asked, with a notable firmness in his voice that suggested that this wasn't the first time he had asked this. The tired boy jumped at the question and looked at Mr. Salmon with a look that tried to convince him that he was wide awake. But his bloodshot eyes and unsteady gaze looked so forced that it made me cringe. "Yeah, I'm awake. Sorry. I didn't get much sleep last night," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes and trying to hold back a yawn. "I suppose that's why he's in summer school. You can't get good grades if you can't even get a good night's sleep." Mr. Salmon looked at him, unconvinced. "I better not catch you sleeping again, young man," he added. "Yes, sir," Nihil responded, still not sounding awake. Even if he was preoccupied with his Sleeping Beauty gig, I had someone to talk to, which made me feel at ease. I walked over to the desk beside him and placed my backpack beside my desk's legs and flopped my coat over the chair. I sat down on the plastic chair and introduced myself to him. "How you doing? I'm Jamie," I said. He slowly tilted his head towards me, his eyes regaining their original hue. "Hey," he mumbled casually, rubbing his face with his hands. He leaned over while tipping his chair backwards, resting his head on the back wall. "You got here even earlier than I did. You must be tired," I stated, trying to pass the time. Either he didn't hear me or he ignored me outright and continued to lean against the wall, trying to find a comfortable position to sleep. I'm assuming that he was too tired to talk to me, but I couldn't help but feel that I was pestering him with my conversation. I decided to stop bothering him and mind my own business and play a game on my phone to pass the time and wait for the class to start. The storm outside worsened considerably, making the trees outside thrash and rattle with such ferocity that I thought that they might be uprooted entirely. The wind howled and roared insanely. The raindrops hitting the windows sounded like knives stabbing the glass, and the thunder was a gong against the chaotic landscape. I wasn't particularly invested in playing Fruit Ninja on my phone, so I allowed the weather to hold my attention. A nervous chasm opened in my stomach, and my concern multiplied. The weather was only getting worse. I had thought that I had been able to fend off the looming sense of dread that I carried on the ride here, but it was now back in full force, showing no signs of stopping. It felt like it was drastically increasing in size over time, possibly growing big enough to swallow the whole building with massive black rain clouds. Any confidence that I felt beforehand drained, and I started to shift in my seat, hoping that no one else noticed my discomfort. Nahil had long since fallen back asleep, and Mr. Salmon was typing away on his computer, completely enveloped in whatever task he was doing. I checked the time on my phone, and it reads 7:52 a.m., nearly time for class to start. I guess the sound of thunder and playing Fruit Ninja was more engaging than I gave them credit for. A creak came from the door, and another boy was standing in the frame, looking apprehensive and uncouth. A baggy beige hoodie was pulled over his head with a purple flat cap wedged firmly over his hood. I saw him glance over at Nihil and I, his displeased expression softening into one that resembled Nihil's before he fell back asleep, tired and uninterested. Mr. Salmon noticed the boy's entrance and glanced up from his monitor screen once more. "And you must be my final student, Philippe. How are you?" I was taken off guard when he said that Philippe was his last student, meaning that the three of us made up the entire class. I wasn't surprised to have a small class, but Only 3? Yeah, that's me, Philippe answered. Excellent. Why don't you have a seat wherever you feel comfortable? The class is about to start, said Mr. Salmon. Philippe walked over towards the desk with a lackadaisical stride, which gave me an uncomfortable view of his sagging jeans and blue boxers. He slipped his backpack off his shoulder and carelessly tossed it towards the wall, letting it slump on the ground. He sauntered over to the desk next to me on the left, sitting on a chair with a muffled squeak coming from the tennis balls on the ends of the chair's legs rubbing against the floor. He shot me a look and nodded his head slightly. "What's good, dog?" he asked. Fine, I guess. You?" I replied, taken aback by him referring to me as dog. I'm a suburbs guy, so sue me. He clicked his teeth together and stretched his arms. "I'm fine, but I gotta take this class 'cause I guess I can't do math for shit," he retorted dryly. I let out a soft chuckle at his response, already knowing what this guy was gonna be like. "What's your name?" he asked inquisitively, twisting his flat cap around his hood. "I'm Jamie, and the sleeping guy next to me is Nihil." Philippe leaned over and got a good view of Nihil, who was still leaning against the wall, looking to be right in the middle of a wonderfully comfortable sleep. Philippe snickered and pointed towards the front of the class. "You know this Salmon guy?" he asked. "I've known this guy since I was a freshman. He's been my math teacher for years," I proudly told him, hoping that my answer satisfied him. "He's been your math teacher for years, but you're still in summer school?" Philippe said, laughing. His remark felt more like a cruel jab directed at me rather than an observation. And I won't deny that it hurt my pride a bit. Yeah. Trigonometry is something I struggle with, I said, my voice feeling smaller after his remark. "It's cool, dog. I can't do any math. Let alone whatever," he reassured me, trying to sound comforting. I'm not sure if my pride was fragile or he didn't mean to sound rude and was trying to relate to me, but I wasn't intending to ask. Besides, I was more curious that he didn't know what trigonometry was. I was too curious to not ask that. You don't know what trigonometry is? Aren't you a junior like me?" I asked him. Philippe looked at me with a droll expression. "Nah, I just moved here a couple of months ago. I was doing pretty shitty in my last school, and my mama told me to take summer school so that I can pass. I was always in locally developed math 'cause I never cared enough to work," he elaborated. Not sure how being lazy gets you into a locally developed class, but the explanation was fulfilling enough. "Well, at least you can get some academic credit here instead of having to deal with switching your timetable around," I added. Yeah, he returned. The squeaks from the tennis balls on the chair and the rumbling of the desk beside me took my attention, and I saw that Nihil had woken up again. He groaned and muttered something unintelligible. "Why you here?" Philippe asked. I struggled not to comment on his broken grammar. "Huh? What do you mean?" Nihil replied, the grogginess of waking up making it difficult to hear his voice. Did you fail math or something?" said Philippe. Nihil yawned and glanced at his phone. "No, my marks are fine. I just wanted a backup credit in case I fail a class or something," Nihil said. Philippe nodded his head in understanding. Nihil looked back at his phone and cocked his eyebrow. "It's 8 a.m. Where's the bell? Did I sleep through it? Wait, where was the bell? I hadn't heard it either. No, I didn't hear it either. Maybe it doesn't ring during summer classes," I suggested. My suggestion wasn't in the least bit satisfying, so I got up from my desk to go and talk to Mr. Salmon to see if he knew the answer. Mr. Salmon, Does the bell not ring during summer classes? It's 8 o'clock and it hasn't rung yet." He looked at me and swiveled his chair, facing towards me. "Is it already 8? I was so busy writing notes for class that I forgot to check the time. The bell was supposed to sound, but I'm not sure why it hasn't sounded yet. It should start in a couple of minutes. I'm still a little busy with notes, so could you please sit back down and wait until I finish this, please?" I thanked him and made my way back to my seat and informed the other 2 students of the answer that I was given. Nihil shrugged his shoulders and Philippe didn't acknowledge me at all. I guess I'm in the same boat as them. There isn't much that I can do but wait for the bell. 10 minutes crawled past us agonizingly slow. But the only sounds that I could hear were the clacking of a keyboard and the raging thunder outside. The bolts of lightning slowly inching closer and closer to the building, threatening to strike the school seemingly at any moment. Mr. Salmon suddenly stood up from his chair and paced towards the door, a scowl present on his face. "I'm going to go to the office and see why the bell isn't on. The 3 of you stay put until I come back," he said sternly. I assumed that he was angry about the office not having sounded the bell, which pushed his lesson back. He twisted the doorknob and opened the door, quickly closing it behind him and walking away briskly, leaving the 3 of us alone. "I guess we got class off today. Sweet," Philippe interjected. "Don't get your hopes up too high. I'm sure they'll run the class without the bell," Nihil retorted. An awkward silence swept over the classroom. None of us wanted to be the first to hold a conversation. Philippe looked antsy, as if he was waiting for his moment to leave the class on some variation of the "if the teacher isn't here for 15 minutes, we can leave" rule. And I might have to follow him. I've been at school for nearly an hour just waiting, which means my expected day of 6 hours just turned into 7 without me even realizing it. A lightning bolt as bright as a flashbang and as sudden as an explosion shone through the window with the intensity of the sun, causing us all to shield our eyes. A monstrous crack of thunder followed, loud enough to make it feel like my bones were rattling inside my body and shaking the desks. I clenched my eyes shut tightly, and I put my hands over my ears, trying to brave the new violent spell of the storm. I couldn't see the other 2, but I'm assuming that they did the same. My heart began to thump wildly, feeling like a pounding drum as concurrent thunder and lightning continued their ravenous assault. It was embarrassing to admit, but I began to feel frightened. I haven't experienced a storm like this since, well, God knows when, so I was completely caught off guard. "The storm's gonna take off the roof," someone shouted, the tone of their voice masked by the sounds of the storm, so I couldn't tell who. My senses were beginning to blur. The sound gave me a throbbing migraine that warped my vision and made me feel like I had swallowed a stone, which was now rocking around in my stomach. I had begun sweating intensely as the wind began to howl, seemingly through the windows themselves. I could hear someone screaming, but I couldn't tell who. A gust of wind so powerful came through, and it threw me off my chair. I collided with the ground, feeling the gush of pain in my back and chest from the impact. At this point, I opened my eyes and I could hardly see. The desks, the floor, and the ceiling were all meshed together. I saw a flash of black whip past me and slam over what I think was a desk, landing on the ground with a thud. I couldn't remember who was wearing a dark top, so the identity of the shape was a mystery. My stomach curled into a knot, and I could feel my hair sliding on the ground with the small puddle of sweat that I had made. My clothes were in a constant struggle of being stuck to me via sweat and being blown around in the wind. I didn't hear the window breaking from the storm, but it must have at one point. It felt like the room itself contained a tornado. Objects began to fly and spin around the room, and I felt my body being involuntarily dragged across the room by the wind. Nearly all the desks were up in the air, slamming into the walls and floors. They made a cacophony of banging metal and squished drywall. I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me, but I ducked down to the ground so that I wouldn't be bludgeoned and get a concussion. I think that Nihil was the black shape that fell over the desk, so he should be near me somewhere close to where I collapsed. But I had no clue where Philippe was. I hoped that he wasn't caught up in this pseudo-tornado, but I couldn't say for sure. Just as abruptly as it started, the storm stopped. The wind exited the room with the speed of a bullet, leaving all the debris it had gathered to slam to the ground with an intense crash. The room resounded with the crash, shaking the damaged floor and making me wince. I started to regain my vision and scope out the disaster scene in our classroom. Desks were dented and scattered randomly. Sheets of paper were strewn about everywhere, torn apart and soggy. I saw a cabinet that used to be firmly against the wall was now leaning over the broken remnants of the teacher's desk. The cabinet looked pristine compared to everything else, only suffering a few minor dents and scratches. The cabinet door opened slowly, and Philippe crouched out of it, holding his head in pain. "Is it over?" he asked to no one in particular, continuing to waddle out of the cabinet. Somehow he managed to fit inside that cabinet during the storm, and he managed to come out nearly unscathed. "How did you fit?" I wheezed, my voice barely above a whisper. Philippe heard my question and ran over to me, dodging the desks along the way. He bent over and jutted his hand out, wanting me to take it. "Man, I thought both of y'all died or something," he said, sounding excited. I took his hand gratefully and let him pull me up from the ground. He yanked my body up with almost no struggle, and I was on my feet faster than I knew it. He was definitely stronger than his slim build suggested. "I'm glad you got out of the closet," I joked, trying to lighten the situation. He scowled and scoffed at me. "Come on, dog, don't play me like that," he said. I chuckled and regained my balance, prepared to find Nihil. Scanning the room, I only saw upturned desks and other debris. I stepped over the desks carefully, and Philippe followed me. I saw him from the corner of my eye leap up into the air in surprise from stepping on something and then dove back. A wheeze and a groan came from the ground that he had stepped on, and I heard shuffling. I looked back to see Nihil standing over an upturned desk, hand on his chest and exhaling gradually. You stepped on me," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. Philippe and I dodged the debris, and each of us held his arms, lifting him up. "Are you okay? Nothing was broken?" I asked. Philippe stepped on my chest, but otherwise I'm fine. He groaned. Philippe made an apologetic face and helped me put him back on his feet. Philippe took a few steps behind him and sat down on the edge of a desk, adjusting his hat. "What was that?" he exclaimed. "A windstorm? A windstorm in the classroom? How does that even happen? Look, the glass in the window is still intact," he shouted, pointing at the window, which didn't have a scratch on it. In fact, it looked like the storm itself had subsided. The clouds still held the same shade of gunmetal gray, but I didn't see a drop of rain, and the sky was entirely devoid of lightning. The storm just disappeared. What happened? Why did the storm just stop? I questioned. The sound of a piercing wail from outside snapped the tension in the classroom over its knee. It sounded like a shrill animal being slaughtered, screaming out for dear life as it was getting torn apart. It was haunting. Following the scream came the sound of something sharp, piercing flesh. The soft squelch and clank of metal on metal was daunting. A splatter finished with shrieks of pain from the animal, finished by the sound of metal scraping against what I assumed to be some sort of plastic, ending with a soft chink sound. None of us knew how to react. We all just stared at each other in abject surprise and dread. Nihil began to move his lips to say something, but the sound of a monotone beep coming from the intercom system interrupted him. We all faced the speaker in the ceiling as the beep turned into what resembled a malfunctioning radio, crossed with television static. I had no idea why the speaker was playing this. Was it broken? "Is that a weather alert?" Nihil asked, his voice heavy with concern. A weather alert. I've heard these before. A broadcasted signal that plays on the radio or TV when extreme weather is about to affect an area. But the storm appeared to be over. Why was this being played now? The speaker's monotone screeching turned into a harsh, firm-sounding voice.
Warning, warning. This message is being broadcast by the Ontario government for all citizens to alert them of a severe weather phenomenon that will last until approximately 11:30 a.m. Please follow these instructions to ensure the safety of you and your family. Stay inside a barricaded room or safe area at all times. Do not come out under any circumstances. Lower the blinds and do not recede them. If you are unable to find a room or similarly safe area to occupy, locate an enclosed space and draw no attention to yourself. Ignore any and all sounds that come from outside your room, no matter how much they disturb or frighten you. Do not, under any circumstances, leave your safe area. We are sending emergency services to aid you with shelter, food, and water. We will locate your homes as soon as possible. If an emergency occurs at your household, please do not contact 911, as the line has been disconnected due to the weather. Emergency services will be on their way shortly after the ending of this transmission. Thank you for listening to this emergency broadcast. Please make sure to strictly adhere to your given instructions.
The transmission ended with a clicking sound, filling the room with silence. I was utterly gobsmacked, completely dumbfounded. What is going on? Why did the school get this transmission? Is the school even safe? I wasn't sure how, but that transmission raised some major red flags deep inside me. I wasn't sure if I should adhere or make a break for it. It was all so confusing and frightening. What were those screaming sounds? Did the brief storm inside the building kill someone? I started to sweat more intensely with paranoia than I had when the storm hit. Someone could be dead just outside our class, and we were instructed not to stay. Philippe looked just as shocked as I did, mouth wide open and eyes peeled, completely frozen in spot. Nihil huffed and walked towards the door. "Mr. Salmon is still outside. What about him?" he asked, trouble and confusion ever so evident on his face. Didn't you hear, man? We can't go outside. I don't care what it said. Our teacher could be dead for all we know. We need to go find him and help him to a room. Nihil interrupted Philippe's rebuttal angrily, making Philippe flinch. Guys, I shouted at both of them. They both turned to look at me. Nihil looked frustrated and Philippe looked apprehensive. Look, we have nothing to gain from arguing with each other here. I have a plan. I want you two to stay here and I'll go looking for Mr. Salmon, okay? Nihil looked insulted like I had just slapped him. You will go looking for him. I was the one who suggested it. Why are you volunteering yourself? He barked, face going red with anger. I guess I had managed to piss him off pretty quickly. Thankfully, I didn't really have a plan. I just felt some primal urge to do it myself, to protect these two and make them feel safe. Well, after seeing how angry you are, I think it's best if you just relax for a bit and take a breather. Plus, it isn't safe for anyone to go outside, and I would much rather go out myself than risk you guys getting hurt. Nihil sighed abrasively. Whatever, man, just get back quickly, he grunted. I gave him a reluctant thumbs up and walked towards the door, prepared to find our teacher. By now, my heart was beating intensely enough to hurt my chest. But honestly, I enjoyed the feeling. I felt brave, powerful even. The thought that I could possibly save someone's life was intoxicating. Don't worry, I'll be back soon, I told Philippe. Stay safe, dog, he responded. I took a big breath and quickly opened the door, hopped out of class, and began scanning the hall, unsure of where to head. Where should I go next?